G'day guys, kia ora, welcome back to my channel. My name is Wildkard. Super Rugby Trans-Tasman Round 2 has just concluded. And it's not looking good. And quite frankly, it's concerning for the future of the competition. The New Zealand teams are currently standing 10-0 after just 2 weeks of competition against Australian teams. And apart from a couple of really close losses in the first round, the Australian teams looks completely outclassed, mostly for 2 rounds. And not just like they lost, but outclassed. Big time. Some games was preposterous. Like, you literally look like grown men were playing against schoolboys. Like, the skill level was just not good for Australian teams. And for the future of Super Rugby, whether it becomes Super 12 next year or anything else that's going to happen in the future, it's very, very bad. This is not going to... No one wants to watch this. Fans are going to get turned away, especially in both countries are going to be turned away with these one-sided games. And it's just not healthy for the game. But, you know, instead of just complaining about it, I am pragmatic. I do want to see rugby succeed in Australia and New Zealand. So I've actually come up with a idea that's going to potentially solve this problem. And it's a pretty simple idea. And keep in mind that it is in both countries' interest for this competition to be competitive and thrive, to build fans. And that's going to basically having like a healthy Super Rugby, having a healthy competition between Australia and New Zealand, especially when South Africa is seemingly going to move more and more towards Europe. It's going to be best interest for New Zealand rugby to make sure that Australian rugby survives and do well. So one thing that I propose, which is a really easy solution that's going to save Super Rugby potentially, is that the New Zealand rugby have to do is change their eligibility rules for All Blacks. And it's just a tiny tweak, and that's going to drastically help out Super Rugby for both countries. So the undercurrent eligibility criteria for overseas players, they must be eligible for so that you must have a license, basically, IRB regulations. The contract be a contract by NZRFU, so they must have a contract with New Zealand Rugby, under contract with New Zealand Rugby, be resident in New Zealand and play, or be available to play for New Zealand team in the NPC or Super Rugby competition. So they must be contract by New Zealand Rugby, and they must be available to play for some kind of New Zealand local team. That's basically the rule, okay? So what I propose is add Australian Rugby onto that list. So if a New Zealand player that has residence in New Zealand who's eligible to play for New Zealand rugby, eligible to play for a New Zealand team or a Super Rugby Australian team. Not Australian local teams, but a Super Rugby Australian team. So add Super Rugby Australian team into that list, and also if they're contracted by Super Rugby Australia. So someone like that, someone who's not good enough to quite make the starting line for New Zealand teams will be very interested to get a starting spot for themselves in Australian rugby, in Australia, for our Super 12 Australian team. That will even out the competition quite a lot, and that is both beneficial for New Zealand and for Australia in a couple ways. First of all, if the competition is tough for the New Zealand teams, your teams are going to get better. The Crusaders are going to get better playing tough teams. All of your teams can get better. All of Australian teams can benefit by having better players in their team. So competition breeds better players. So if you have just one-sided games against Australian teams, you are actually going to get worse. So you want the Australian team to be stronger. So this having more eligibility means that some of your players are going to come over to play for Australian teams, and that's going to make your current teams better. So that's one thing really good for New Zealand rugby. And another thing that's really good for New Zealand rugby is there are players that might not get an opportunity to like enough game time in New Zealand because they're under like a big name like Aaron Smith or Geordie Barrett. All right, you're not gonna get the fullback position at Geordie Barrett at the Hurricanes. So that player could potentially play for Australia and actually have the game time to build up their own game, build up their skill set, and they might actually one day be better than Geordie Barrett or replace Geordie Barrett when he gets older or gets injured. So it's better for New Zealand rugby as well because they're going to have a bigger pool of available players with more experience to choose from. And that is big win for New Zealand rugby in both ways. And those players don't have to be under the contract for New Zealand rugby. So they don't have to pay for their salaries. So that's a big financial bonus for New Zealand rugby. They have literally players available for selection that they don't have to be contracted until, being selected. And it breeds competition. And it gives your current talents more room, more game time in the highest professional league in the region, right? So that is a small tweak that will literally change Super Rugby forever, and that's gonna make the competition super good. It's gonna attract fans, make competition more competitive. It's gonna help out both nations to grow better players, and it's gonna, take a lot of financial burden off New Zealand rugby as well. So I think a small tweak like that would really help out Super Rugby. And it's, I don't know, hopefully that someone watches this video and get the message to New Zealand and they will consider it and maybe save Super Rugby, because I don't want to see the sport die. Because at the current state of the game, with these kind of results, it's just, even as a hardcore rugby fan, I was borderline wanted, like, if I don't have a YouTube channel that I have to review these games, I would have turned it off. Like, I would stop watching. It's just a waste of my time. It's the skill gap is so big. It's not even as remotely entertaining to watch. Anyway, let's have a quick look through the results. The game started on Friday night with Hurricanes versus the Rebels. And the Hurricanes, the Rebels played better than last week, although Hurricanes is the lowest ranked team in the league. Hurricanes really look like, they really look a quite easy game for the Hurricanes. They weren't really under much pressure throughout the whole game. Lots of tries being scored. Julian Savea was the hero, in my opinion, for the game. He looked, when the Hurricanes played the New Zealand competition, it was very rare to see him score a try. He was, very largely nullified. But against the Rebels, it looked like the old Julian Savea from 2015 again. He was scoring tries, running over people. He looked quite good. If you look at the match stats, quite one-sided. Hurricanes mostly had the attack, and Rebels also had to make more tackles because the Rebels just missed their tackles and led to tries, basically. That's a very interesting stat there. They had almost double the run meters, yet they also made more tackles in defense. And that's why. 44 missed tackles for the Rebels. Oh my god. I didn't even know that's that big of a number. But yeah, pretty bad game for the Rebels. The next game on Friday night was something that I look forward to. The Highlanders versus Western Force. So this was probably the best game of the weekend. The Western Force was the underdogs playing at home again against the Highlanders. And they hung in there. The Force hung in there all the way till the end. The Force is just one of the teams that don't really have the superstar talents that other teams have, but they just really have the mental fortitude to grind out at all costs for a win, right? 12 missed tackles, 15. That looks more like two teams that are pretty even. And yeah, very close. Western Force hung in there all the way till about 10 minutes left in the game. Yeah, and all the way until about and the second half, the Western Force actually were on top of the Highlanders. The first half, the Western Force was was getting a beating, but second half, Western Force really pulled back, and Highlanders defense was very, very good. Their loose forwards, I think, what's his name, Perry Parkinson, and Shannon Fritzell, Billy Harmon. These guys are really good at turning the ball at the breakdown, and that's what world class players. You took world class players, a good performance to beat the Western Force for the Highlanders. Because the second half, the Western Force were dominating Highlanders and were very close to scoring again and again and again, and only to be just snuffed out by the Highlanders' extremely good loose forwards. And then this was the most entertaining game of the weekend. I'm looking forward to play Western Force again next week. The next one, Blues versus Waratahs. This was also really, really bad. The Blues were dominating both up front and at the back. The Blues winger, Heem, I think it's Bryce Heem, he was absolutely Superman this game. He replaced Caleb Clark because he's playing for the Sevens, and he looked better than Caleb Clark has ever been all season. Keep in mind, it's against the Waratahs, but still, he looked extremely good. Every time he got the ball, he looked like he was making a break. He definitely played better than Ioane. Better than, what's his name? Not Akia. Anyway, he did definitely play better than Ioane in that game. So just by the comparison, Bryce Heem probably puts his name down as a potential All Black. And you can see the Blues just running wild with that 700 run meters. What is this number? Oh my god. And both teams tackling weren't that great. The Waratahs had a bit of spurt of comeback in the second half with Jack Gordon just being brilliant with this intercept try. So they had a bit of a comeback in the second half, but close to the second half, around the midpoint of the game. But it wasn't, they weren't able to hold up for the entire duration. It was pretty bad for the Waratahs. Next game was the Chiefs versus Brumbies. Again, this game I expected a lot more from the Brumbies, considering that they had a very good game against Crusaders the week before at Christchurch, where they only lost by 2 points, and they had an opportunity to level the game with the conversion, with the try they scored in the last minute. So going into this game, I thought the Brumbies would be much closer than Chiefs. But D-Mac really played well this game. He really directed traffic much better, and his kicking game was by far the superior than Lolasio's. Lolasio's kicking was really, really poor this game. There was a lot of kicks that was just pointless. Didn't have any pressure. It didn't have much follow up. It was just almost looked like they ran out of ideas of attacking ideas. They just went, just take a kick. And sometimes you almost look like a panic kick. Like, let's just put a quick kick through and see what happens. And it was just not very good. The Chiefs defense was impeccable this game as well. Quite the contrary, about the same level. But the Chiefs defense really fronted up and made sure that the Brumbies weren't gaining any territories. So, very disappointing game once again. Like, look at the amount of tries being scored in these games, man. It's incredible games. Just very one-sided. I expected a lot more for the Brumbies, to be honest. That was very, very disappointing for me to see this. However, the Brumbies had a disappointing game on Saturday evening, and there was one more game to come on Saturday night. That was the Reds versus the Crusaders. And after, I guess the Reds were watching this game and said, "Hey, Brumbies, you had a poor game. You know what? Hold my cup." And this is the game that I literally been waiting for all season. This is the single most embarrassing game I have ever seen in my life. I honestly can't remember another game that's worse than this. Maybe some Wallabies performances against Argentina, maybe. But in Super Rugby level, this is probably one of the, if not the most embarrassing thing ever. This was the finalist for the Reds. The Reds was the finalist, not the finalist, the winner for the Super Rugby Australia. And Crusaders were the winners for Super Rugby Aotearoa. So this is a final versus final, like winner versus winner game. This is the biggest game, Super Rugby game of the year. I waited all year for this one. And this is the result. It's a basketball score for Crusaders. This was so one-sided. It was actually painful to watch. So, yeah. The Reds, to be fair, the Reds was, unlike some of the other games earlier this week, like the Waratahs, the Reds didn't, like, play super poorly. It's just, like, the Crusaders just play super well. Like, you can't really pick, like, you can't really say, like, the Reds had major, like, super bad, obvious flaws in the game. Like, it's not like the Waratahs game where the tackling was clearly a big issue. Like, it's not really like that for the Reds. The Crusaders just had better in every way. Every time Crusaders ran the ball, the Reds were just giving away advantage line, giving away territory. It was almost like the Crusaders just bigger and stronger. But I don't think that's the case. It's just the way that the Crusaders are able to match up for the Reds players. They just, they have a big boy running at your smaller backs. And even though that the backs make the tackle, you're still going to lose a few meters out of that. And they do that with all throughout the game. It was just a masterclass of rugby, this one was. The way that the Crusaders are able to play as a team, they know where everybody is to play the offload game. When someone makes a break, everybody is in support. It was just spectacular to watch. And Richie Mo'unga, the superstar of the Crusaders, was just spectacular. He scored 3 tries against the Reds, and every time he scored, it literally looked like the players were literally falling over, looking like fumbling fools trying to tackle him, and he just looked so easy. He was just running over with a smile on his face. So easy. 3 tries for Mo'unga, and look at the penalties. 9 perfect conversions from all angles on the field. Perfectly done. And it's not to say that the Reds had nothing going for them. The Reds had a brief moment where Harry Wilson was in God mode. He scored a try for himself. He set up a try for Vunivalu right away. So the Reds weren't like completely a dud, but overall the Crusaders just in every aspect dominated the Reds. I don't know what else to say. Scrum absolutely dominated the Reds. The lineouts, just the running game around the field. Every time the Crusaders attacks, there was some stats around halftime. Crusaders had like 40 runs or something, and there was like 32 line breaks. So like a third of their runs, not a line breaks, made over the advantage line. So a third of runs were over the advantage line, whereas the Reds were like only a third of their runs made the line. Also the opposite, literally the opposite. Only 1/3 of their runs made the advantage line. It was pretty bad to watch. But anyway, I don't want this to drag on for too long, guys. Hopefully a better week coming up this weekend. It's a bit hard for the rugby fans. Maybe if some of you guys know anyone in New Zealand rugby, please put forward my idea to allow New Zealand players to play in Australian Super Rugby level and allow them to be available for selection for the All Blacks. That would really make the competition even out, and that will be good for both the New Zealand rugby financially. You'll build better players for New Zealand rugby, for the All Blacks. You'll build better players for Australian rugby. You'll build better players for the Wallabies. You'll have better competition for Rugby Championship. We're going to get more people watching the game. You're going to have much better future going forward. Because at this rate, even the most hardcore fans will find it difficult to watch. Anyway, guys, thank you for watching. See you guys next time.